Jashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Jashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajagacharya Ashtottara Shrimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Nitai Gaura Premanandi. Oh, glories to the assembled devotees. Oh, glories to the assembled devotees. Oh, glories to the assembled devotees. Oh, glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimad Bhagavatam Swami Tinamine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nivishesha Sunyavadi Paschadeshtarine Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimad Bhaktivedanta Swami Tinamine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrindam Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnebhyo Namo Namaha. The verse on the board is the wrong one, unfortunately. The text for today is chapter 7, Canto 7, chapter 11, text 33 to 34. This verse was covered yesterday. I see everybody has a device. Everybody that's or a wonderful book. So it's 33 to 34. So we can chant responsibly 33. Yes, it's a mistake. It's a mistake. That verse was covered yesterday. So, all right. I'm going to chant 33. Yeah. So, Upyam Upyamana muhu kshetram Svayam nirviryatam ivyat Nakalpate puma satyai Uptam bijam cha nasyati Upyamana muhu kshetram Svayam nirviyatam iyat Nakalpate punas sutyai Uptam bijam cha nasyati Upyayamana muhu kshetram Svayam nirviryatam iyat Nakalpate punaha sutyai Uptam bijam cha nasyati. Please chant. Upyamana muhu kshetram Swayam nirviyatam iyat Nakalpate punah sutyai Uptam bijam cha nasyati. Upyamana muhu kshetram Svayam nirviyatam iyat Nakalpate punah sutyai Uptam bijam cha nasyati. Upyamana muhu kshetram Swayam nirviyatam iyat Nakalpate punah sutyai Uptam bijam cha nasyati. Upyamana muhu kshetram Swayam nirviyatam iyat Nakalpate punah sutyai Uptam bijam cha nasyati. I'll read the text 34. Evam kamasayam chitam kamanam natishevaya viraja jeta yata rajan agaivat kama bindu bihi. So I'll do the word for word first. Upyamanam, being cultivated. Muhu, again and again. Kshetram, a field. Swayam, itself. Nirviyatam, barrenness. Iyat, may obtain. Nakalpate, is not suitable. Punaha, again. Satyat, for growing further harvests. Aptam, sown. Bijam, the seed. Cha, and. Nasyati, is spoiled. Evam, in this way. Kama ashayam, full of lusty desires. Chitam, the core of the heart. Kamanam, of the desirable objects. Atisevaya, by enjoyment over and over again. Virayeta, may become detached. Yata, just as, Rajan, O king, Agnivat, a fire, Kama Bandhu Bihi, by small drops of clarified butter. Translation. My dear king, if an agricultural field is cultivated again and again, the power of its production decreases, and whatever seeds are sown there are lost. Just as drops of ghee on a fire never extinguish the fire, but a flood of ghee will. Similarly, overindulgence in lusty desires mitigates such desires entirely. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. If one continuously sprinkles drops of ghee on a fire, the fire will not be extinguished. But if one suddenly puts a lump of ghee on a fire, the fire may possibly be extinguished entirely. Similarly, those who are too sinful and have thus been born in the lower classes are allowed to enjoy sinful activities fully. For thus, there is a chance that these activities will become distasteful to them, and they will get the opportunity to be purified. So, there's a simile that's been used here. So an agricultural field that is prepared and used for growing plants from seed over and over again means that the surface is being broken up, the hard crust that forms on the soil. The plants are developed by various horticultural techniques. But this field is being cultivated without rest. Then it may lose its ability to produce in the same way, and this is the simile, in the same way that desires or cravings that are coming from this vigorous bodily appetite, when they're indulged in excessively, they become less vigorous or moderate even. So that's the simile that's been made. As there's a second simile that's used, and that is that in the same way that an overindulgence, that an inundation or a deluge of ghee on a fire will put out a fire, so vigorous bodily desires, when indulged in excessively, will be made mild. So those are the two similes that are there. So this is kind of an interesting statement that Narada Muni is making to King Yudhisthira. It's pretty interesting. So I thought to look a little bit at Narada Muni's teachings, even in other contexts, to get a better understanding of Narada Muni and what he's expressing here to King Yudhisthira. So I looked to an interesting conversation that Narada Muni was having with King Prachini Bari to get an insight into how Narada is able to make such a statement. So he paints a picture in this conversation with King Prachini Bari, how desires that are coming from a vigorous bodily appetite, how they become visible. So this is the first thing we're going to look at. Now, there's the actions of the gross body. So, one sees some action being performed by the gross body. That action that you've seen performed is, in fact, a reflection of the mental state. So, in other words, you can say that activities of the gross body are reactions of what is existing mentally. So it means you've seen something externally, but it's a reflection of what's existing mentally. So Narada Muni, he's stating something interesting to King Prachinibhari. So I'm taking us to this conversation because it gives some background, I think, to Narada's understanding and what he's expressing here. He tells King Prachinibhari, and this is his statement, so I'm going to read it slowly. One can understand the mental or the conscious position of living entities by the activity of two kinds of senses, the knowledge acquiring senses and the executive senses. Now, we're going to look at this a little bit. Since the activities of the mind are those of thinking, feeling, willing, that's what's going on in the mind. It's actually the willing part of the mind that is being shown in the activities of the body. So what the mind wills, the body then performs. So this means that there are senses that are executing what is willed on the mental plane. So, for example, let's say there's anger in the mind. Then the tongue, which is one of the senses, is going to vibrate perhaps a curse. So what is existing on the mental state is then executed by one of the senses. So anger in the mind, the tongue vibrates a curse. So, for example, on Sunday, there was a man in the lobby, a very large-bodied man. So, one looks at a person and you get exactly the picture of the mental state by what came out of the mouth, because he started shouting very strongly, "I want my $7 that I gave as a donation to be returned." So his mental state, clearly there's anger in the mind. So it's coming out in that form that somebody owes him something. There's anger. So one understands the mental state by what the tongue is vibrating. So the tongue is the executive sense. So now this means that the mind can team up with a particular sense. So if that teaming up is of the angry mind, with a hand, for instance, then there can be a fighting action. So fortunately, in that case of that gentleman, his mental state teamed up with the tongue. It didn't team up with the hand. So we were spared. So the mind of a person practicing Krishna consciousness acts in the same way. The mind is acting in goodness, so it wants to do things that are going to be pleasing to Krishna. So then it teams up with a particular sense. So the tongue then vibrates the Maha Mantra, or the hands get raised to ecstatically express emotion, or the legs move in a dancing motion in front of the deities. So it's the same thing. What is in the mind is then getting, that mental state is teaming up with a sense to express. So now, as long as the mind's in the mode of goodness, the activities are good. But if the mind's in the mode of passion, then the activities get a little troublesome. And if the mind's in ignorance, then the activities actually put one in the lowest species of life. It's difficult to distinguish the actions of the human being from those of lower species of life. So now you can ask the question, where do these bodily cravings come from? So Narada Muni, because this was the purport, where do these bodily cravings come from? So Narada Muni explains, and this I'm going again to the conversation with King Prachinibhari because it really pads out this particular statement today. Here are his words to the king. My dear king, the living entity who has a subtle mental covering develops all kinds of thoughts and images because of his previous body. Take this from me as certain. There is no possibility of concocting anything mentally without having perceived it in a previous body. So, very interesting. And this is from Srimad Bhagavatam in the 4th canto, the 29th chapter, and the 65th verse. It means that as long as the living entity is in this material atmosphere, he's got a subtle vehicle in the form of the mind, which is developing all kinds of material desires. So notice the term used was it's a vehicle. One's being carried or driven by the mind and those desires present in the mind. So Srila Narada Muni, he actually requests King Prachinibhari to accept this fact that those desires are coming from previous bodies, or those thoughts and images that are in the mind are coming from previous bodies. So he asked King Prachinibhari to accept this fact because, he's an authority. So this is the conclusion, that the mind is the storehouse of our past desires. And this present body is there because of those past desires. So in a similar way, whatever we desire in the present body will be expressed in a future body. So there has to be some means for expression for what that vehicle is carrying, those desires that are being carried in the mind. So this has implications, obviously, because if the mind gets purified through practicing Krishna consciousness, then in the future, one will naturally get a body that is spiritual and full of Krishna consciousness. It's just very natural. You're going to get the right body to express what's in the mind. So now returning to the topic of desires, where there's this vigorous bodily appetite. Here it's, lusty material desires. But anyway, they're vigorous, very strong. So taking into account Srila Narada Muni's teaching, we can understand that these thoughts or experiences have been undergone through past lives. So the impression is kept within the mind. So, you get the impressionistic school of painting. So it's a little bit blurred, and you just get some sort of sense of, let's say, it's some kind of pastoral scene. So maybe there's a river and trees, but it's done in a little bit blurred manner. It's something like that. Some impression is left in the mind of that past activity or desire. And then this impression starts to take shape. It becomes a thought. So that means that there's a chain of continuity from one life to another. And from previous lives to this life, And so from this life to future lives is continuity. So what Narada is presenting to Yudhisthira, King Yudhisthira here, is that the thoughts that are of this bodily appetite type, means, want to have something, want to enjoy something, and they are particularly vigorous, like very strong, they can be lessened when teamed up with a particular executive sense. So this is very interesting because now we want to see how this works. So now Narada Muni, going back to the earlier statement that I read that he made to King Prachinibhari, he tells us that this teaming up of what's in the mind with a particular sense actually happens with, like here the advice is, try and team it up so that it's happening excessively. The action is happening excessively. So now we're going to see how this works. Now, it seems unusual to think that if there's excessive expression, that desire is then going to become milder in the mind. So you express excessively, but in the mind, the desire becomes milder. So Srila Prabhupada points out that the desires, and this is in the purport, that the desires that are referred to here are sinful ones. So this implies that the mind's in ignorance. So that's where that particular mind is. So if we take this example of somebody having a desire to drink liquor, I think it was mentioned yesterday. It's a particular category of persons who are in the lower classes. And so drinking and intermarriage are part of the activities that are performed. So if we take this example that in the mind there's a desire to drink liquor. So that means that experience has been undergone in past lives. It's not suddenly there. It's been undergone in past lives. And it's become manifest again in thought. Somebody has that desire. So the mind's will then gets teamed up with the tongue. It wants to taste the substance. So now, Srila Prabhupada tells us that this kind of sinful activity, here the example of wanting to become intoxicated, is allowed for in those lower classes. So these lower classes, it was mentioned, they're accustomed persons there. In their mind, there's desire to steal, to drink, to have illicit sex. Those are the desires stored in the mind. So Narada Muni here is stating that the overindulgence or overindulgently teaming up between the willing in the mind and the usage of the senses, here the tongue, like in our example of intoxication, is going to lead to a lessening of that desire. So this is interesting, right? So now, since intoxication generally leads to a lessening of the power of judgment, that's automatically what happens, or there's a lack of discrimination, the intelligence stops working, then it means that poor discrimination is going to be the state of a person who's now intoxicated. So that's going to bring about some sort of distress, because if you're not using good judgment, you're going to make wrong decisions. So generally you see that a person in an intoxicated state will say something that will upset somebody. It's without fail. Their judgment is not there. So often this leads to some sort of physical backlash. Somebody may get so upset with them and like I've heard examples too, actually, interestingly enough, of persons being in an intoxicated state and somebody actually punching the person so that their teeth were lost. So this is definitely a particular impression that would be stored in the mind. And what happens is that the desire to indulge in the intoxication, or the desire to taste that kind of liquor of some sort, then gets coupled with physical distress. It's no longer just a clean desire. Now there's an association in the mind that that desire is accompanied with physical distress. I mean, the person may now be toothless. So, it changes the desire somewhat that's in the mind. So to speak, I mean, I'm going to use a pun, it waters down the desire to actually drink. So this is possibly one illustration of how that desire starts to be lessened somewhat, which is what is being expressed by Narada Muni in this particular purport. So the more the person allows the senses to team up with that desire in the mind, the more the likelihood increases that the poor judgment in many situations is going to lead to some physical backlash. So, I gave two examples, or at least an example of what I've heard of two instances where indeed the person's lost teeth. So, so now looking at stealing, which is very interesting. In the city that I'm from, there's very many persons who have the role of domestic workers or domestic servants, and it's a commonly understood thing that stealing will happen. It's accepted, it's understood. Everybody complains about it, but the domestic servant is needed, so it's accepted. Stealing is going to happen. So one year I was visiting Johannesburg, and my sister-in-law took me to a store, and I heard the most interesting story on this topic of stealing and how a person functions in the society where this is an accepted practice. So this particular store owner had a laborer who was there for cleaning, keeping everything neat and in order. And at some point, a burglary happened. So it's normally understood in the city, if a burglary happens, it must be connected to the domestic worker or the worker. It's just understood automatically. So anyway, a week passed. This is the store owner relaying the story. A week passed, and the laborer who had left the work, and it was understood probably the laborer was responsible for arranging the burglary. The laborer came back to the woman, bringing jewels that had been stolen, but the jewels were missing the stones. The stones had been attracted, and the person was asking his former mistress if she would please purchase from him these particular jewels minus the stones. So this is an example, the mind in ignorance, the acceptance of that category of persons stealing. It didn't faze her. It didn't. The man had no problem coming back to bring the jewels minus the stone and ask her if she would repurchase it from him. Anyway, so now, in this particular case, for that particular person to have that activity of stealing become detestful, as Srila Prabhupada states in the purport, it would obviously necessitates maybe the person many times trying to resell something and not having any success to understand, oh, this activity may not actually be conducive to surviving or making some sort of living. Or alternatively, of course, if the person were indeed to be arrested repeatedly and have to spend time in a prison. But in the country, it's just, even arrests are not done because stealing is just accepted. So, the person may not learn through arrest, but certainly through perhaps discovering that it's very difficult to resell the stolen item, and certainly in that condition. So now, Narada Muni also, in his conversation with King Prachinibari, he explains this continued existence of the mind. So I'm going to read the Sanskrit. It's kind of interesting, this particular statement or teaching. It's from Srimad Bhagavatam, the 4th canto, the 29th chapter, and the 48th verse. Sarve kamanurodena manasindriya gochara ayanti bahusho yanti sarve samanaso janaha. So he says, the mind of the living entity continues to exist in various gross bodies, and according to one's desires for sense gratification, the mind records different thoughts. In the mind, these appear together in different combinations. Therefore, these images sometimes appear as things never seen or never heard before. So this is a little realization that Narada Muni is sharing, that even though the body is changing, or the body will change, the mind continues. So sometimes there's the example, and Srila Prabhupada gives us, that somebody will have some memory of or some particular physical action that's actually similar to an action they performed in an animal body, so like a dog's body. So somebody may rub their back against a wall. So it's some memory of having been in a dog's body. But the mind has that. It continues. The mind has that memory. So now there's an interesting part where Srila Prabhupada's talking in commenting on this particular point of Narada Muni's, that the mind puts different combinations together. So you get new images that appear new. Actually, Srila Prabhupada says that sensual images, they're actually recorded in chronological order. So it's like there's some order, interestingly enough. So what this means is that they'll manifest in chronological order. So, and that's why there'll be a particular body to take care of this particular image in the mind. Then there'll be another body to take care of the number 2 on the list. There'll be a third body to take care of number 3 in the list. There has to be found an expression for those thoughts or images that are carried and desires in the mind. But it's done very chronologically. So very interesting. It's all extremely ordered. So the mind appears so unordered, but the way it's managed by Krishna is, okay, that desires first, number 1, number 2, number 3. Okay, body for number 1, body for number 2. So, so the mind is planning the material enjoyment, and the gross body is the instrument for realizing those plans and desires. So basically, the mind is that platform where the desires are coming and going. But where the desire sticks, it's strong, there's some strong impression, that's where some either sense has to execute it, or else a body even has to be given in a future life. So becoming purified of these desires in the mind, the entire chronological order, means that one has to stick out to carrying the orders of the spiritual master. So making a huge jump from the lower classes where it's allowed, that overindulgence, for persons that are in a more refined state of being, then what needs to be done is sticking to the order of the spiritual master. So that's a way to break down that whole chronological order that's stored somewhere in the mind. So, and Srila Narottam Das Thakur, he actually states this very point. Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chitete Korea Aikya Arna Kariya Mane Asa. So stick to the order of the spiritual master. So the desires can come and go, but that's the stabilizing force. So now, if the regulative principles are followed, so again, this is, going to the opposite end of the spectrum, much more refined beings, there's an awareness of what's necessary to live a dharmic life. So there, if the regulative principles are followed very rigidly, then the mind gets trained to desire nothing but Krishna. So that's the way to do it. Just following the principles trains the mind. So obviously it means making good discrimination in all circumstances at all time. But one knows what the principle is, avoid those particular things, the intoxication, the gambling, the illicit sex, the flesh eating. So now there's a very nice prayer. I always find it necessary to look to prayers, because always one looks for assistance in trying to bring any difficult desires that are in the mind under control. So it's a very nice prayer. And it sort of ties up with this point that ordering the mind has to do with holding on to the order of the spiritual master. And it's by Srila Raghunath Das Goswami, where he's reminding the mind to take shelter of the orders of the spiritual master. So here's his prayer. My dear mind, in this material life, you are attacked by lust, which is like a gang of thugs that waylay innocent pilgrims, strangling you with strong, terrible ropes in the form of distress, pain, and futile endeavors. In this condition, you must cry out piteously and invoke the mercy of the unalloyed devotees of Sri Krishna, the killer of the demon Bakasura. They will surely protect you from this dilemma. So now his prayer is relevant because it acknowledges the distressing situations that arise from previous unwanted activities. So on the mental plane, it's like ropes that are binding one, because there's desires and they go along with impressions connected to the desires. So it's like horrible ropes that have bound one. It's like one's imprisoned. So he asks the mind to cry out piteously. You acknowledge the terrible condition, bound up, and particularly to look to those pure devotees of Lord Krishna. And the reason for this is that those devotees are actually the guardians on the path of devotional service, and they're the guardians because it's their order that's actually stabilizing the mind and not allowing for whatever those desires that are there to get expression, to team up with some sense. So that order is that protection. So these are some thoughts on this verse. If there's any comments, thoughts, questions.
I particularly appreciated the final sentences about the order of the spiritual master being the guardian against the desire taking expression or taking action. Thank you for that. In Bhagavad Gita chapter 3, there is a verse where Krishna says that lust is like a blazing fire, and any amount of fuel you give, it can consume. In today's verse, it is where it can consume, but you give it a deluge, and the fire gets extinguished. So that seems to be an encouragement for sense gratification. Just do a lot of it. How would you help me understand it?
Okay. So in that particular simile in the verse today, the the deluge of the ghee on a fire is such that it could distinguish the fire. So in the same way, it's said that the vigorous bodily appetite, if it's indulged in excessively, can be made mild. So that was what the statement was, or the simile used in this particular verse. So your question was the particular application of ghee, that it can extinguish the fire. How is it that it can make the desires milder? Yes. Because over there was the statement that lust is very difficult to overcome. It's like a roaring fire. So indeed, not to confuse metaphors or the simile that's used here, the lust can't be fed. It's completely dangerous to feed it, because the whole explanation by Narada Muni that's given is that the lust in the mind wants to find expression through one of the senses. So in order to prevent even that expression, one has to have the recourse of the order of the spiritual master. That's the way to actually keep the lust at bay, but one cannot in any way permit it to find expression through a particular sense, because that is what fuels the lust. It gets expression, more is wanted, and it's insatiable. There, the metaphor, the roaring fire, you're feeding it. You don't want to feed it. In this particular simile that's used here, it was that the inundation of ghee on a fire will extinguish the fire, but the comparison is that for the persons who are prone to sinful desires in the mind, let there be expression, because that excessive expression is actually going to reduce the desires, because, and I explained, I hope, through that those desires will be reduced because the repeated expression will lead to such negative consequences. So in the mind now, suddenly there's the association between that desire and distress. So hopefully the person then starts to get a little bit understanding that that desire is accompanied with distress. So maybe the expression is not so free anymore. Yeah, so a different metaphor, simile that's used.
Thanks for your class. It's very nice the way you had it, very well organized, and you had a whole follow-up. Just looks like you put some time into that.
Thank you.
I was thinking, you know, I didn't hear about this incident in the lobby where the fellow became. Did he get a refund?
Well, actually, the question I asked Prabhupada Mataji, who was standing next to me, was, should we give him some prasadam?
Oh, so you gave him some pizza or something?
No, but I had seen him a minute earlier just hovering there, so I asked him if he'd taken prasadam, and he told me yes. He had a big plate of rice and 3 cups of apple juice. But then after he was standing for a while, the mental state that he's normally carrying became manifest through the tongue's vibration.
Because prasadam can pacify people.
It did for some time, clearly. He was able to stand for some time before it came out.
Then he felt cheated. Like Bhakti Siddhanta said, I think somebody asked him, "How are you?" or something, and he said, "The face is the index of the mind."
Yes.
So, and then I was thinking, Prabhupada said, you know, people that are here, they had some association with Krishna consciousness before, you know, in maybe a previous life or something like that, because, and then, well, Chaita Guru, you know, so everything just kind of evolved, you know. Anyways, oh, well, they used to say, well, they still say, if you have a higher taste, you can give up the lower taste. So, and if the senses are restricted, they can, you know, see that the sense gratification they're going after is like diminishing returns, like, you know, like the alcoholism, you know, they drink and then the next morning they have a hangover, and then it's just the same thing they're going through over and over again, you know. So like with myself, I started drinking when I was 15, but I only drank once, and that was because the liquor that we were drinking was called sake, and it's like a Japanese rice wine, whiskey or something, and it was so distasteful, but I got so sick. But the whole idea was this actually happened December 8th, 1965. My mother was taking all the kids downtown to see Santa Claus, but I was too old for Santa Claus, you know. So we decided, because that's a Catholic holiday, and you can that was a day off. So we had it all planned that we would go into my friends came over, and we'd go to the liquor cabinet, and we would get, you know, all the liquor we wanted. But for that day, he locked it. But the only thing was that there was a decanter of sake on the shelf, and we go, oh, wow, that's the only thing we can drink. It was horrible tasting stuff, and so we drank it anyways. But then I got so sick, I just stopped drinking for 2 years, and then I went back to it. And then by the time I became 21, I was pretty disgusted with getting drunk all the time. So I just, fortunately, I came to Krishna consciousness, and, you know, I gave everything up in one day. As soon as I moved into the temple, I gave up cigarettes and alcohol. I had already become a vegetarian, but you know, that's just the thing how it brought me about, you know. So I'm glad for that, because I was really getting disgusted. Plus, not only getting disgusted with that, but material life in general. I think Ravinder Swarup gave a little expression on how he came to Krishna consciousness. He was very much attached to literature and, you know, those higher things, you know, different authors, and, you know, it really, you know, brought him about. But then when he got to Krishna consciousness, he was able to give all that up, because you can see the bigger picture. You know, it's like the whole package, you know, whereas, you know, they hint at the mode of goodness, you know, but the senses are so strong and impetuous that they're always demanding. So unless you have, real, like Prabhupada brings it all in perspective, all the different levels of thinking, feeling, and willing, so you can see where you're going and where you've been, and, the higher platform. So things become more relishable when you have a bigger picture. Then I was thinking, I heard this poem once. It said, "A child comes to the, what was it? A child comes to the world with a heart of gold, but the ways of the world turn them cold." I mean, that sounds pretty good, but that's not really what's happening, because we're a continuation of our last life, So we could have had a rotten heart, and children, they look innocent, but they're really not. And Prabhupada said, innocence is, if they appear innocent, they should become intelligent. So you can't let children remain innocent. They have to see the bigger picture. Otherwise, they'll just go through their whole life, like with that innocent thing, but it doesn't really help them, So they must become intelligent, Prabhupada said. Let's see here. Oh, and then we also hear that to those who are too attached to sense gratification, the resultant determination of devotional service does not take place. So that's one of those key verses that really, tells you where people are at and where they're going and stuff like that. And then we have that we had that little booklet called "The Regulative Principles of Freedom." So if we follow those, principles, we can get a higher taste if we have, submissive oral reception and Krishna consciousness. So those are just a few things that we, what you said, just kind of brought those to my mind, but thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Jitendra Prabhu. I'm glad it set off a whole stream. Thank you very, very much for sharing that.
Hare Krishna, thank you for your class. I'm glad you mentioned Nardamuni, because this whole verse reminds me of, usually it says, like in chapter 88 of 10th canto, or in chapter 10 of 10th canto, where Nardamuni's cursing the Nalakuvara and Manigriva. They were engaged in sense gratification, like normal, jumping up and down. And Nardamuni cursing like, "You're ridiculous." So it appears, for our own perspective, my question is, it appears that we only really get serious about our spiritual life, Christian consciousness, only if there's some calamity. Like Parishik Maharaj was cursed, and then, he definitely got serious. He started fasting for 7 days. So what are some steps we could do before some major calamity comes on us? Because when some major calamity comes, then, okay, let me get serious. But what are some steps because it's going to come on everyone sooner or later. What are some steps we could do before it comes? And that way, when it comes, we won't be so surprised. So.
The question was, what are some steps one can take prior to a calamity coming? And examples were given of devotees that seem to need a calamity to really get serious about their Krishna consciousness, like Parikshit Maharaj or Madhagriva, who were cursed by Narada. Actually, it's working on the assumption that one's not already experiencing calamity, but the truth of the matter actually is that one is in a very calamitous situation right now. So everything appears all right, but the difficulty is that mind is there, and the mind is the storehouse of all those desires from previous lives and those impressions. So why it's calamitous right now is that at any moment one could be at the mercy of those desires or those thoughts. So the real step is to hold on to the order of the spiritual master, and particularly the antidote is those regulative principles. So one holds on to them no matter what. No matter what. So that's the real step. Just holding on to that is so purifying and keeps the mind under such control that one is actually in a safe position. So you don't really have to wait for a calamity. You already begin the purification process. You hold on to that purification process. You don't let go. So don't wait for a calamity. It's already there. But you have the means to stay afloat. Thank you very much for your kind attention, for very nice feedback. It's very much appreciated. Hare Krishna.